If I can call this meeting to order. Good evening, folks. We are tonight going to be entertaining two agendas. We are going to have our Committee of the Whole agenda, and that will in fact be followed by our council meeting agenda. As many of you in the gallery know, we do discuss a lot of the issues that are lifted by members of council, the reports that are outlined in our agenda, and then the council meeting, for the most part, we ratify the decisions that were made during Committee of the Whole. So with that, I'm going to ask Councillor Angie Demery to start us off with a prayer, and that will be followed by Mr. Joe Longfellow to lead us off with the national anthem. Councillor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Heavenly Father, source of all truth and wisdom, who knows and loves the whole creation, watch over our community, that truth may prevail over distortion, wisdom triumph over recklessness, and the concerns of every person be heard. And dear God, please continue to bless our Olympic athletes. Amen.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command. Car ton bras s'est porté l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée de plus brillant exploit. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Joel, thank you. As always, well done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Clerk, are there any addendum items this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. None this evening.
Thank you, Ashley. Members of council, I'll need a motion to confirm the agenda, please. Mover and seconder, Councillor Bodner, Councillor Elliott. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. Are there any disclosures of interest this evening? Councillor Bodner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 18, that involves Shirks and Shores, and I have a business inside Shirks and Shores.
Thank you, Councillor Bodner. If a councillor can raise that item for the conflict, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Any further disclosures? With no further disclosures, and as noted by the clerk, I'll ask members of council for items requiring separate discussion. Councillor Steele.
Your Worship, item 18.
Thank you. Councillor Bodner.
Item 10, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further items? Members? With none, I'll entertain a motion to accept the remainder of the items. Councillor Demery, Councillor Steele. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. There are no presentations this evening. There are no delegations this evening. Madam Clerk, are you putting the hammer down or what? Well, I'll now move on to my report, members of council. I have quite a report this evening. Today, we had the pleasure, I personally had the pleasure to meet with the Right Honourable John Turner, former Prime Minister of Canada. As many members know, Mr. Turner is a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine, but as well a good friend of the city of Port Colborne. He was in the area and decided to stop by City Hall to say hi and present me with his book that he most recently released. Again, simply to say hi and pop by and see what's happening here in the city of Port Colborne and throughout the Niagara region. And although initiated by his former business relationship with Young Ones Laura Canada, when they began the process of investing here in the city of Port Colborne in 2000, as you know, John has continued to be a great friend and frequents the city on occasion to see what's happening, and he calls his second hometown, and is very interested in what's happening here in the community as well as our business community and of course throughout the entire region of Niagara. As well, we had the pleasure today to meet with Minister Jeff Leal, the Minister of Rural Affairs. He was here in the city today, and we took the time to speak to the Minister about many different initiatives and issues that we're currently following, and he was very interested in being brought up to date with some of the issues in smaller town Ontario. Some of those issues that we discussed with him today, and there was quite an agenda. current economic development initiatives that we're currently embarking on, business retention, expansion, new investment, including investment opportunities that we are currently working on. And before the media asks me what they are, you do know I can't divulge those interests yet, but they are very exciting, and we are hoping they come to fruition in the short term. We did discuss some of the economic strategies that are currently underway, both in the city as well as the region, first being Carbohydrate Valley and the food processing strategy, dealing with companies like Young Bunzlauer, Ingredion, Archer Daniels Milling, ADM, P&H, the government elevator, along with Godrich, and of course Pinty Foods, and the continued success they are having within both Port Colborne and throughout the province of Ontario and across the nation. As we see on TV, Pinty's is becoming very well known worldwide with the products that they're bringing forward to the consumer. Next is our metal steel fabricating manufacturing strategy we spoke about, and upon taking him for a tour across the city, showed him some of the expansions that are currently happening, Oscom being the latest expansion, and of course JTL and others that continue to expand within the city of Port Colborne. One of the things that I impressed upon the minister as well was the ongoing positive partnerships and contributions that both local high schools are making through their high schools majors programs, and how they're injecting a lot of the students into the different sectors throughout the community. So it's no longer just post-secondary that's been being emphasized to enter into the workforce, into those niche sectors that we have here in the city, but also starting with the high school major programs, introducing our high school students to those economic, to the jobs, quite frankly, that are available within both Port Colborne and Niagara. Of course, the emphasis behind that is keeping our local talent here locally versus having them leave the city and or the region. The Economic Gateway Strategy, which affects all economic sectors, whether it be the ICI, industrial, commercial, institutional sector, but as well the retail sector, and of course the lifestyle and residential sector as well. In particular, how robust it is and how exciting it is to be recognized as only one of two ports in Ontario. The city of Port Colborne is recognized by the province of Ontario as one of two ports, official ports in the province of Ontario, and with that our designation as a gateway economic center, and the reasons behind that, which he was fully aware of. Minister Neal also recognized the newly established 1,000+ acres of industrial employment lands that we just established, and of course the gateway incentive package that is attached to and augments the additional incentive packages such as our local CIPs, that being our Brownfield CIP, our Waterfront CIP, our Industrial CIP, our Main Street CIP, and our Downtown CIP, CIP being the Community Improvement Plans. He quickly recognized that we were being very aggressive, because any city of our size that has 5 CIPs, 6 including the Gateway CIP, can be known as a very aggressive community with respect to economic development, and of course introducing those strategies both locally, regionally, if not globally. He was quick to note that most municipalities are lucky to take on 1, and of course we've taken on 6. So kudos to you, council, staff, as well as those partners that are involved in those CIPs. And that aligning itself with provincial and federal incentives, and of course programs that are available at those levels of government as well. Made it very clear. Excuse me. Made it very clear to the minister that we're building our economic strategy based on our strengths. For example, our multimodal capacities, water, rail, air, as well as our road capacities, and of course attaching ourselves to distribution logistics, making it a lot easier, especially for the manufacturing sector, to set up shop here locally, and of course take advantage of the multimodal capacities to get their goods globally. I pressed upon our location being within a 1 day's drive of over 44% of North America's annual income, and how extravagant that is with respect to getting our attached economy to those areas of North America within a 1 day's drive. Lastly, with respect to the gateway strategy, is our marketing strategy, and spoke very much about how aggressive we're getting on getting the word out with respect to a lot of what we have to offer both here locally and regionally. The provincial multimodal goods movement strategy that the province introduced a few months ago, and the minister was touring the province to put together over the course of 2013, Spoke about Port Colborne and Niagara's contribution to the multimodal goods movement strategy, provincial strategy, as we are a multimodal transportation hub. And equally as important is the robust and diverse supply chain that we have that is able to attach itself to that multimodal goods movement strategy, both locally as they work here in Port Colborne and Niagara, but as much as they work as well within the gateway, the southwestern gateway, including our western neighbors all the way up to Windsor, and as well our eastern neighbors across the border. Spoke about our research and development and our knowledge-based advantages, and of course our marine training facility that we're trying to reestablish here in the city. We talked about the interregional strategic economic logistics corridor and gateway connections. Very long sentence. What does it mean? Once again, it means how we're working together with our neighbors to the west, in particular within the southwestern gateway, that being Hamilton, KW, Kitchener-Waterloo, Sarnia, Windsor, Brantford, and attaching ourselves to them and vice versa because of the advantages that we have to offer them, especially with respect to our multimodal capacities and, of course, our supply chain. Spoke about the east-west arterial road connecting the Peace Bridge and, of course, the Continental one that leads into the Peace Bridge from the American side to a provincially recognized economic gateway center, which is us, and, of course, this being the east-west arterial road being the first leg of the Mid-Peninsula Corridor, connecting trade corridors within southwestern Ontario and contributing to Ontario's overall economic prosperity. Spoke to him about the vision that I brought forward regionally and to the neighbors to the west with respect to creating a second trade corridor, putting aside the name Mid-Peninsula or Niagara GTA corridor and simply extending the 402 from Blue Water down into Niagara, being a new trade corridor and augmenting the existing trade corridor, that being the 401 from Ambassador to Thousand Islands, from west to east. Spoke about the servicing of the gateway employment lands and, of course, the need to move swiftly to service those lands. Spoke to him about the current financing strategy and how we expect to take the financing strategy here in the city of Port Colborne and leverage with an expected programs that we can only expect will come from the provincial and federal levels, especially with 2 elections coming down the pike. We can expect that, and of course he met that with a grin, and we're hoping that with shovel-ready projects that Ron and his department have been preparing, and Ron and I have discussed this on many occasions, that and the financing strategy we have in place, that we can do as we did with the Valley project and the other projects that we had in place when we struck the CMP deal, that we can take, in that case, 15 million and turn it into almost 50 million. In this case, take the financing strategy that we're working on right now and multiply that by 3 and have those funds available for future capital projects, and taking on no debt or no impact to the property taxpayer, and pay cash for those capital projects that we're looking at, and of course the industrial lands being front and center, the servicing of those lands, the rail spur, the application that we're making right now for the planning of the new rail spur on the port lands, and the rail on apron on the port lands along the canal. Spoke to him about Niagara South Coast, Niagara's lakefront enhancement strategy, augmenting, of course, Niagara's South Coast with what Niagara overall has to offer as a world-class, dynamic destination, place to live, work, and play. With that, how much we have to offer from the south to the overall dynamic of Niagara and how we're looked at worldwide. I think one of the most important issues that we're working on right now is the imminent need for GO Transit year-round, and with GO Transit being put in place year-round, the imminent need to integrate Niagara's transit system throughout the entire region. Spoke to him about the Niagara Sport Commission and the abilities and economic benefits of sport tourism in Niagara. Spoke to him about policing in small communities, small rural communities, especially a Lake Erie border community, and the partnerships that we're working on right now, and I'm trying to personally work on with the NRP, the RCMP, and CBSA, CBSA being Canada Border Services Agency. And lastly, and most importantly, is healthcare. I spoke to him about South Niagara Hospital and the UCCs, and of course the planning process that's about to be embarked on, the $26.2 million planning grant that we just received, and the expectations that he will receive from us with respect to our work to contribute to that overall planning process. That being the contributions by the South Niagara Healthcare Corporation, community-based primary health care, and of course our preventative health care program that we've embarked on, having to do with the Valley Health and Wellness Center, our facilities, and overall programming that we're putting in place to really reculture the community to have front and center health and wellness, and of course active, vibrant, fun activities here available to our residents and our visitors here in the city of Port Colborne. And as well, I mentioned to him that my intent is in the spring to summer to have a Niagara Summit, the Port Colborne Summit, to invite key policy and decision makers down to Port Colborne, ministers, deputy ministers, those that make the decision, not to have a forum or a summit based on fluff, but to in fact to roll up our sleeves and get down to work and highlight not only the aforementioned that I just talked about, but have a discussion, a real good discussion on working together to aggressively move forward these strategies, not only on behalf of Port Colborne and Niagara, but equally as important on behalf of the province of Ontario. Upcoming meetings and discussions. I will be having a meeting, a telephone meeting tomorrow with the Deputy Minister of Ag and Food to discuss some of the initiatives that we're trying to move forward, economic development initiatives. Those are sector specific and of course project specific with respect to economic development initiatives that we're working on. As well, the same kind of meeting I'm trying to set up right now with Minister Eric Hoskins, the Minister of Finance. That date's pending, but I'm working on it right now to discuss with him the same issues. As you know, I am planning a trip to Ottawa to discuss the East Side Canal and Lakefront Portlands, currently under the jurisdiction of Transport Canada, and that meeting is being set up as we speak, and we're trying to aggressively move those agendas forward with respect to some of the plans that we have for those lands. Members of Council, the bottom line, as you know, is my intent is to continue to meet with the ministers and deputy ministers, policymakers at both levels of government, on a regular basis, a more aggressive basis, to ensure that they are aware of our ongoing initiatives within both the city and the region. And of course, the agenda behind that and the desire behind that is to aggressively move forward a lot of the projects that we have been working on, and quite frankly, in my opinion, aren't moving fast enough. So it's, again, it's my desire to meet with these folks face to face, to roll up our sleeves and ensure that a lot of these initiatives get done sooner rather than later. So with that, I know it was a long one this evening, but it was a very busy day, busy week, busy month, and I figured I'd bring you up to date on some of those initiatives. Any questions? Councillor Butters?
Thank you. Just one, Mr. Mayor. Going back to your discussion with them regarding the monies supposed to be granted for a new hospital, and some of the stuff that's been in the paper of late that sounds like the site is chosen, just from what I've read. So I was wondering what the response was back from these folks that you talked to, because that's not really our position.
Right. Well, quite frankly, we didn't get into depth conversation about site location. The takeaway or the message I wanted to give to the minister is that our expectation within the planning process is that that's what it would be, a planning process. I know there's been a lot of opinions. I've been reading the paper as well, from board members in particular and the Mayor of Welland with respect to expectations, in particular as it relates to the location and the site chosen. I just read recently that a board member, I believe from Welland, said that the site chosen hasn't been written in stone yet. But then I heard a contradictory statement by the chair saying that it has, and that they're moving forward with planning that site. The expectation, as I said at the last meeting, quite frankly, is to ensure that our thoughts are known. As you know, we've been working quite diligently on this, not only with community-based primary care, but also with the new hospital and, of course, the urgent care centers that we're expecting to be built alongside, or I shouldn't say alongside geographically, but when that's built, of course, the UCCs will be chosen with respect to location, and they'll be built as well. We haven't got into that discussion with them yet, but again, the planning process, we would hope, would entertain a lot of that dialogue. Most importantly, and I have to agree with Mayor Sharp, most importantly is dialogue with the public and the expectations that the public want to bring forward. And of course, with that, their desire to be part of the process with respect to the construction of a new hospital, regardless of what site it goes to. So again, the takeaway, the message that I gave to the minister was that we want to be involved in that. And having said that of course, whether they agree with it or not, the bottom line is we will have something to say about the location. Okay? Any further comments or questions? With none, thank you for your patience We'll now move on to the Regional Council's report. Councillor Barrick is not in attendance, so if there's anything that you want to ask or have questions about Regional Council, I'd be more than happy to entertain them. With none, members of staff, no questions? We're good? Okay, we'll move on to Councillor's items. Councillor Steele. Councillor Butters, Councillor Bodner, Councillor Doucette.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Hanson. With the region taking the lead on the Kalali Street West project, can we just maybe send them a note with regards to the intersection of Steele and Kalali? It's a minefield. The potholes are pretty bad there, so if they could keep an eye, and I know it's winter time, it's a lot tougher, but if they could be a little bit more diligent in filling some of those potholes. It is a stone area because they have been digging there, so if we could just send a note to them about that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hanson, Councillor Hanson. Mr. Hanson, any comments? That's in the future?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Steele, that was done today. We had a couple of complaints come in, and that was forwarded to the project manager for Kalali through the region.
Thank you. Councillor Butters?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As much as there are complaints and concerns, there's also happy things. I got an email from one person and a phone call from another, White Road and Empire Road area, really complimenting our staff on a good job snow removal this winter, in a particularly difficult winter, storms and blowing snow and just horrible conditions for our folks to be working in. So I just pass that along. Nice that those folks took the time to let us know that they were at least happy. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodner?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we have a lot of bridge work going on in the city, and Clarence Street Bridge in particular has been closed off and on for some time, they haven't been putting the sign up at the end of Kalali Street to warn people that the bridge is closed, the lights aren't flashing. I called your secretary and she looked after it, had them put the sign there. But I wonder whether we can just, every time we know there's a bridge closure, ask them to put the sign up, not wait till, because quite often they miss it, and then trucks and cars are trying to turn around there.
Sure.
It's kind of a mess. So I just
Okay,
wonder whether
we'll
we
look
can
after that.
institute that just as a regular thing. And just one more thing, we have a couple of students from Niagara College in the audience, film students, I believe, from broadcasting, sorry, yes, of course, yes. And I'm sure they have to be here because their teacher told them they had to be here, but, but just in case the teacher's watching, they did show up, two guys, okay? I'll vote for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and welcome. Great to have you guys out this evening. Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Hanson, I was just wondering how our snow removal budget is doing.
Mr. Hanson.
I know that other communities are now adding money to that pot. Do we need to do the same, or?
Mr. Hanson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Doucette. I don't think Peter and I have sat down and really done that analysis yet. We've had some discussions on it. What we're proposing to do, I know there's been some concerns about the removal in the downtown area, and what we'd like to present to council tonight is just a proposal to do a partial removal. And what that is, we're going to start tomorrow on removing the snow piles that are in the market square to free up some of that area for the marketeers once that gets going to a larger extent. And what we're suggesting, because the public works staff with the recent storms have been so maxed out in terms of their hours and the stress on the equipment and so on, what we'd like to do with council's concurrence is do a partial removal. And what that is to take the loader and the snow blower, go along all the curbs in the downtown core, do that removal, get that snow out of there, and take the backhoe and free up some of the windrows in terms of the access to the stores, but not do a full removal downtown because of the constraints to the budget and the operators being maxed out in terms of hours. We like to, with council's approval, take that sort of approach and carry on from there. Hopefully with a projected thaw coming next week, looking ahead to some of the weather, mid-40s Fahrenheit next week, looking to maybe some of the stuff disappearing on its own. So that's what we're proposing to do starting tomorrow.
Great. Councillor? Yep. That's fine. Further new business, Councillor's items. Councillor Bodner?
Let me just add to the snow removal part. If we get to a spot where you know, you're doing a little bit more. Can you put the handicap spots maybe high up on the, you know, to maybe do those first if we have a choice? I know people use those for a reason, and usually they have a hard time getting over any amount of snow. So if you just move that up.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Bodnar. Thank you, Mr. Hanson. With no further new business, staff updates. Anything you guys want to bring forward? Everybody's good? Peter, you're fine? I know we do have a budget meeting tomorrow. The budget meeting tomorrow night at 7 o'clock? 7:30.
Well, I would,
Go ahead.
thank you, Your Worship. In concurring with my fellow members here on the Committee of Adjustment, just in our personal opinion, it's probably going to be a very quick meeting. They're not controversial, or I would assume only the proponents will show up, and I doubt if any of the public will show up. There's very minor issues. We will probably be done early, so if that's the case, if everybody could be here for 7, we should be done by 7-ish. Then we can get going that much earlier.
Can't you? Okay, that's great. Thank you, Councillor Steele. Madam Clerk, you have posted the meeting for 7:30. Can we actually get started earlier?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because public notice has been published for 7:30, you should not start the meeting early.
Okay. Okay, so 7:30 tomorrow night, guys. Budget meeting. That's good. Here in the chamber. Excellent. Okay, hopefully we can get her done. Okay, so with no further updates, I will be entertaining two motions. One for the minutes of the second meeting special of Committee of the Whole dated January 20th, 2014. And secondly, the minutes of the third meeting regular of Committee of the Whole dated January 27th, 2014. Members of Council, mover and seconder, please. Councillor Steele, Councillor Doucette. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. Okay, items requiring separate discussion. We're going to start off with item 18. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am bringing this forward for Councillor Bodner's conflict.
Yes, you have to read it.
That's fine. Well, let me make it larger. My eyes aren't what they used to be.
Here, you want these?
Yeah, no, I've got those, but only when I wear my contacts. Shirkston Shores regarding a request for permission to hold weekly fireworks display events for 2014. That pursuant to section 6.1.1 of bylaw 49894507, the Council of the Corporation of the City of Port Colborne authorized Shirkston Shores to hold display fireworks events on the following dates. All Saturdays, June 14th, 21st, 28th, July 5th, 12th, 19th, 26th, August 2nd, 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th, all of 2014. That such approval be conditional on the issuance of a permit by the fire chief in compliance with bylaw 49894507 and payment of applicable fees. That the following information be submitted to the Port Colborne Fire and Emergency Services for review a minimum of 2 weeks prior to the holding of the first event. A fireworks site plan including but not limited to separation distances to the public and vulnerable areas, location from where the fireworks are being fired, fallout zone and direction of firing, information concerning the floating platform for which the fireworks are to be fired, including the platform size. Event description information is required, including description of fireworks, type, size, and quantity, firing procedures, manual or electric, emergency procedures, traffic and control plans. That Shirkston Shores be advised that as the authority having jurisdiction, Port Colborne Fire and Emergency Services will conduct spot site inspections and may revoke approval for any violation of the Ontario Fire Code or the Explosive Act prior to, during any one of the following or any one of the scheduled events.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Elliott, are there any questions or comments? Noting the conflict, all those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. We'll now move on to item 10. Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Department of Planning and Development Report number 2014-12, subject, medical marijuana production facilities. That council receives this report for information purposes and that staff be directed to proceed to amend the provisions of the zoning bylaw, site plan control bylaw, and policies of the official plan to regulate and provide provisions related to medical marijuana production facilities.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Butters, questions or comments? Councillor Bodnar.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I wonder if Mr. Agolina could just expand on that slightly and tell us what this will do and we may have questions after that.
Thank you. Mr. Aquilina?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Bodnar. This follows up on the report that we presented to Council last summer, that actually informed Council of the new regulations that are coming down from the federal government. It's a licensing process that is strictly with the federal government. It's out of our privy. We are no longer involved in the province of Ontario with medical marijuana. It's all being thrust down from the federal government. This report dovetails on the past report to inform Council to actually put in place or propose to put in place regulations that deal with medical marijuana facilities throughout the city of Port Colborne, to amend the site plan control bylaw to actually regulate that, and to amend the official plan to deal with the medical marijuana facilities. The report speaks to the fact that I engaged our legal counsel to get some interpretation of what they thought medical marijuana facilities would be defined as under our zoning bylaw. They do say it is an agricultural use. Council will recall that was my position as well. What the lawyers are telling us to do, however, though, is to actually have a defined use as a medical marijuana production facility, and to actually allow that as well in the industrial zone, subject to the zoning amendment for that use, and allowing that to be in the industrial zone, and to have our official plan policies amended to actually have the cultivation captured in an industrial zone. In the agricultural zone, cultivation is permitted, but they also say, let's have that definition of medical marijuana and also have it as a defined permitted use in the zoning bylaw as well under the agricultural zone. This report is asking Council to have direction to proceed with the planning process to amend both the City of Port Colborne zoning bylaw, the official plan, and our site plan control bylaw. The zoning bylaw will then capture setbacks from sensitive land uses from medical marijuana production facility, and that will be before Council for consideration, and the public would be involved through the Planning Act process.
Thank you. Councilor?
Mr. Mayor, I know no one asked or alerted us to speaking, but I know there's members of the audience here that have concern about this, and I don't know whether anyone wanted to speak, and it'd have to be Council's decision, obviously, to let them speak. But if there was any clarification questions or anything, throw that out.
So are you asking for leave to allow the public to speak on this report?
Sure, if they so wish, yes.
Okay, thank you. Before I do that, members of council, are there any questions or comments further to this report? Councillor Butters.
Yes, I do have one, Mr. Mayor, and I'll probably have a few more, but when, through you to Mr. Aquilina, when you talk about the cultivation portion happening in the agricultural area, are you saying that the next phase of would happen in an industrial zone, or would, I'm not sure I followed you on that.
Mr. Aquilina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Butters, what this report talks about is that right now, cultivation, medical marijuana is an agricultural use.
Mm-hmm.
Our zoning bylaw defines it as such. Our official plan supports that. We still need, they're still recommending we actually have a definition of medical marijuana that would then be captured under the zone provisions for the agricultural zone. In order to be considered an industrial zone, in the industrial zone, the medical marijuana would be a defined use as well and permitted as well within the light and heavy industrial zones.
Okay, so would, apart from the cultivation and the growing of it, and I'm talking more about after it's to be harvested and processed, we'll say, is that going to be allowed, or is that part of your thought process, that would be allowed in an agricultural zone or only in the light industrial zone?
Mr. Aquilina.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, both zones, cultivation, packaging, and selling, in the agricultural zone as well as the industrial zone.
Thank you. Excuse me. Mr. Aquilina, another question with respect to zoning. Is there an opportunity for us to contain the zoning or the use, this use, particular use, in a zone other than agricultural? So what I'm getting at is can we actually contain this particular operation within an industrial or commercial, light industrial zone?
Mr. Mayor, it would be subject to council's consideration to actually spot zone different areas of the municipality where you want this use to be in. Any individual could come forward and actually propose somewhere different than what the zoning bylaw would dictate, and that is a subject, an application for council's consideration.
I go back to a few years ago, when we had applications for adult entertainment facilities, and council decided, because we weren't too keen on having a facility like that in Port Colborne, we contained it within a certain zone in the community. Is there an opportunity to do that here? Can we say, we don't want it in ag, we want it in an industrial zone or a light industrial zone? That's it.
Mr. Mayor, you could do that. What I would caution, though, is that the zoning bylaw right now defines it and permits it as an agricultural use. That is the difficulty, to now take that away from the agricultural designation and zone, to no longer allow it as an agricultural use. Could be challenged.
Okay, thank you.
Could be difficult.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Members, Councillor Bodnar has requested leave of council to allow members of the public to speak on this report. I'll need a motion, please. Councillor Bodnar, Councillor Butters. Questions or comments to leave? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this report? If you do, to come on up to the podium. If you just want to state your name and your address, you're more than welcome. Just press the button. You're good.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, but I think all the questions that council members suggested here and answered by our city planner, Dan, was sufficient enough. I believe, Dan, you mentioned that there's a possible question period or public, I don't know what you would call it, a public question and answer period to your planning.
Mr. Aquilina?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you to the presenter, as part of the application to amend the zoning bylaw and the official plan, there is a statutory public meeting that all the members of the public will be advertised to the local newspaper. This is a comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment, so we have to advertise in the newspaper. We put it on notice online as well. Every opportunity is there for the public to come to council and make a presentation once the application is before council. The notice will actually dictate what some of the setbacks will be and other zone provisions that would apply to permit a medical marijuana facility.
Thank you, Mr. Aquilina.
Yeah, right now I see that as long as it's in agriculture area, the city or nobody else really has any say on that. That's the take of your report.
Mr. Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, our legal counsel has advised us that it is an agricultural use. They're advising us, though, to actually have a new definition and to then put that definition as a listed permitted use and put that under our zone provisions for the agricultural and rural area, subject to different provisions dealing with setbacks and things of that nature.
Now, having said that, you're going to add that not only to the ag use, but also to the industrial use.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
So, and this goes to my question. So if in fact we hear from the members of the public that they prefer not to have it in certain agricultural areas, does council then have an opportunity, I'm not sure what word to use, but I'll attempt to use the word direct or encourage that use to be an industrial versus agricultural?
Mr. Mayor, I'll leave it that our legal counsel is not advising us of that. So it's something we can look into, but that's some difficulty because the definition in the agricultural zone and the definition of agricultural is that. It's the growing of crops, it's the rearing of animals. It could be difficult, and if we're challenged, it could be a losing
So the only
endeavor.
reason why we're having a planning report and or a process under the Planning Act is to simply receive public input and as well to put in place a site plan?
Three things, Mr. Mayor, is to amend our official plan to allow these in the industrial areas
Okay, right,
for the cultivation,
right.
to amend our zoning bylaw to contain a new listed defined use, medical marijuana production facility, amend the site plan control, but part of the zoning amendment, though, would actually contain setback provisions from
As part of the
sensitive
overall
land
site
uses. So in order for a medical marijuana facility to be actually permitted and allowed, you may need to be 100 meters away from a sensitive land use. You may need to be 300 meters away from a sensitive land use. That is something that council will have to consider, what they feel as appropriate separation.
So council sets that standard, or is there a
It will
template that?
be recommended through the planning process. Ultimately, it's a council decision what you want to put in place in your zoning bylaw.
So you have the authority to put provisions in place that may in fact impact the use of that particular piece of property.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Good
Before you
question.
sit down, I need your name and address.
Good question. Good questions and good answers.
I need your name and address.
My name's Kerry Fallon. Address is 2156 Fire Lane number 2, Port Colborne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying about changing the bylaws
Excuse
and
me.
restrictions
Excuse
and
me.
such.
Can I get your name and address,
Yes,
please?
you can. Nancy Meisner,
Right.
2122 Fire Lane number 2,
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy.
next door to Kerry. When you make changes to an existing bylaw, in our situation where we are, the grow-op is current. It's already been in operation and running. We already know they appear to have a second crop curing now. I'm starting to smell the odor again. Sneak one in before the deadline kind of thing. Would there be a possibility that they could grandfather their use of the land because it's already established, they've already got a precedence? If you change bylaws, is that going to address our concern?
Mr. Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, the municipality does not have any notice that that use is a commercial use under the new regulations that could come into effect April the 1st.
Right.
So right now, that is a private facility. This bylaw will actually govern the commercial aspect of the medical marijuana production facilities. The municipality has not received any notice that that address is proposed for a commercial grow-op through the new regulations that take effect April the 1st.
Will you be given a list? Ultimately from Health Canada?
Through Mr. Mayor, every proponent needs to inform the municipality, needs to inform the police force, and needs to inform our fire services.
Mm-hmm.
We have not received one from that property that you are referring to.
Mm-hmm.
But to be very specific to her question, they can't be grandfathered because the legislation is moving from private to commercial as of April 1st.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. So if that license is granted before our zoning amendments are in place, potentially they could be considered grandfathered. We do
Okay.
not, Mr. Mayor, have that information that one is actually proposed. I haven't received anything, and the letter would come either to the clerk or to yourself.
Thank you.
In the Ottawa area, there was talk about an old chocolate factory being rejigged so that it could be a grow-op, and Health Canada had indicated in the newspaper that it was their preference that the grow-ops be kept in industrial areas because it would be less noxious when they're curing their crops. So I don't know, I mean, if that's what Health Canada wants to do, can we assume that that's the kind of licensing that they'll give out, or are you hearing anything that they want to go to agricultural? Like what I'm reading says industrial.
Mr. Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, under the regulations, there are quality control assurances that need to be put in place 24 hours, 7 days a week security.
Mm-hmm.
The regulations are very detailed of what you actually have to have in place. The market may dictate where that facility actually operates, because a lot of the facilities as we know, you need to actually have ample lighting in place. I am not sure that a facility in the agricultural area, if not in a lighted facility, is actually going to actually yield the crop that one would expect if there are if there are private individuals that need that marijuana. I'm trying to think of the proper word to use. So,
Oh, yeah, I don't think any of us in the area argue that there's a need out there. It's more the location of this particular operation. So if they get their license from Health Canada prior to the amendments to the bylaw, then that's grandfathered in, is that what you're saying?
it could very well be, through you, Mr. Mayor.
And so what would be the timeline then for the bylaws?
Mr. Aquilino?
Depending on council's direction tonight, once we receive the direction from council, we will then immediately initiate the amendments to both the City of Port Colborne zoning bylaw and official plan.
I just had one more question, and I see Ron's hand going up and down. Is there any consideration given to the infrastructures in the area where a grow-op would get permission to operate? We're concerned about where do they get their water from, because we're all on wells that, you know, they're not deep wells where we are. If we go beyond 33 feet, we have sulfur wells, so they're all shallow wells. We're wondering about the hydro. They do have their lights running at this point in time in their greenhouses at night. What does that do to the hydro systems that are going out there? Does it overload them? Because along the lake, we often have blackouts and brownouts. Who incurs the cost of bringing better infrastructure out there? You know, what about, you know, those kinds of concerns? Would that be taken into consideration with bylaws?
Mr. Aquilino?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, other municipalities that I have read, speaking to the issue of potential dewatering, there needs to be information that actually substantiates that there is sufficient potable water to actually operate that use, and would have to be demonstrated that it's not going to have an impact on neighboring wells or water supply.
So they can't draw from the lake because they're like half a kilometer from the lake, that kind of thing?
Through Mr. Mayor, that's part of the requirement that would need to be satisfied and addressed.
Okay.
Taking water from the lake, it's out of the municipality's jurisdiction. That's something that the Ministry of Environment looks into, the taking of water permits. And you're now into a federal potential body of water. It could go to another layer of government as well. Municipality does not get involved with potable water. We have the region of Niagara that looks into that, to the wells, cisterns, and the official plan direction would actually inform a proponent to actually supply that study that actually demonstrates that there is no impact on neighboring wells.
Or infrastructure in general.
Or infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Councilor Bodnar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to Dan, Nancy asked, can we get it done before the April 1st deadline? And we have certain regulations where we have to give notice of a meeting for so many days, am I right? You know, there is a time frame, so say council says yes tonight, do the math, and can we do it before?
Mr. Aquilino?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councilor Bonner, the Planning Act requires 20 days notice to the public. And then if the council approves, once the report is brought forward, we can expedite this. Then there's a 20-day appeal period before that bylaw amendment would come into effect. If council has concern for the use in the agricultural area, we can proceed with that, and we can come back to the industrial zone, because in order to have that in place, we need to amend the official plan, which is a little longer process. But if council is more concerned in the short term to actually have provisions in the agricultural and rural area, then I would give that direction for us to proceed just with the zoning bylaw amendment for that particular area.
Councilor?
Yeah, I'm just thinking we have to be fair to both sides here. The proponent would want to know, and the residents would want to know if in reality they are going to put a processing plant there, for lack of a better word. So I think that's something council, you know, should make that decision tonight probably, so that everyone knows the rules of the game and where we go from here.
Thank you, Councillor. Further questions or comments? The concern that I have, Dan, is at the end of the day, we're hearing concerns from the residents, and it's not the first time we've heard them, especially with respect to smell. And when we put zoning, especially site plan control in place, it's done deliberately to not negatively impact neighboring properties. And we're hearing that this use, although not totally objected to the use but of the property, but the impacts that it has on neighboring properties. So therefore, I go back to your comment earlier with respect to setbacks and things like that. And I think this is where Councillor Bodnar is going, and I don't want to put any words in his mouth, and he can jump on me if he has to. But if in fact there are concerns, legitimate concerns, with respect to setbacks, and we try to address those in our site plan, but they can't be addressed because the property just ain't available to accommodate. What then happens? So and what I'm getting at, Dan, and I'll say it in English, I guess, is that if in fact they're smelling this happen when it's that time of the production, and then it requires, I'll just pick a number, being a layperson, 500 yards versus 100 yards, that would need to accommodate the residents in the area so they don't smell this. And the property can't accommodate that. What then happens?
Mr. Mayor, that's a good point. And as I mentioned, there are different setbacks that I've seen under my research. Some have been up to 500 meters. That then goes to if you're next to a school, senior's home, or an open space, anything that's
Or
really sensitive.
a public park.
Yes. And so if council puts in place, let's just throw a number, a setback. Our neighbors to the east have a 70-meter setback. If council wants to have a larger setback than that, then that would actually be instilled in the zoning bylaw. That would say, okay, for a medical marijuana production facility here, you need to be 70 meters away from a neighboring residential lot.
Now, okay, so stopping there, how do you establish that?
Mr. Mayor, that would be through the zoning bylaw.
No, how do you establish the actual setback? Do you simply go out there with your nose and smell it and keep walking further and further away until it doesn't smell anymore? How would you actually set that setback?
Mr. Mayor, the setback is determined and is measured by the lot where that facility is located on. Draw 70 meters around the entire lot. So if a use, or if another lot is located closer than 70 meters, well, it would not meet the zoning bylaw setback.
No, I get that. But how do you establish it? What science is in place to establish it? Is it as simple as just going out there and keep walking? Like I just said, and I'm not being facetious. Do you simply just walk away from the facility until it doesn't smell anymore and establish that distance as the setback? Or is there a formula that they're using?
Many municipalities refer to the D6 guidelines that are in place by the Ministry of Environment, the guidelines. And in that guideline, if you're a Class 2 facility, they say, okay, 70 meters should be sufficient. If you're a Class 3 facility, 300 meters should be sufficient.
And if I'm correct, that's what I'm hearing from the residents. Is that's one of the, again, I don't want to put words in your mouths, but that's one of the concerns, is the actual smell of the facility, as well as the infrastructure impacts, which we've clarified that would be dealt with through the process. With respect to their application, they would have to satisfy those requirements. However, some of the other concerns, I'm assuming is based on order. So I think, as Councillor Bodnar alluded to, that should be dealt with sooner rather than later to establish that setback within the zoning bylaw. Moving forward with this report, this actual bylaw that you're going to bring before council, I'm assuming within the next month or two. So is there an opportunity to actually bring that formula or that in place within that report? And I'm not sure how far council wants to go with that, but that, I think, is the issue. If in fact they're going to be allowed to operate here. Other than that, I go as far as saying make it even further, so that would force them to have to operate in an industrial zone that can accommodate them, that can therefore accommodate them.
The other thing too, Mr. Mayor, just to caution, in the industrial zone as well, there would be a setback that would be required as well.
Absolutely.
And it would be the same thing that would be subject to the agricultural zone as well. It's going to be based on separation from the residential areas, the open space parks, schools. That's going to be the setback that would be put in place. So
Absolutely.
if there's anything in the in the industrial area, that would not be able to be met as well. But if that is actually in place, then the next step, if someone does not meet that setback, they would then have the option to vary from that setback to the Committee of Adjustment. So there would be a process, public process
That's available for them,
Yes.
a mechanism for them
Yes.
to tap into with respect to getting relief of
Correct.
the actual bylaw. But having said that, if there's nowhere in the city to accommodate them based on the bylaw vis-à-vis the setbacks, then they simply just wouldn't be able to come to the city.
That's correct, if the Committee of Adjustment is not granted.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Councillor Kenny, and then back to Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Aquilina. Mr. Aquilina, is the smell that the residents are concerned about, is that just a short period of time, like during the harvesting, or is it all the time?
Mr. Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, from my knowledge, not personal, it's the harvest, is when the actual plant grows the buds.
Okay.
And that's what causes the odor. And then when it's harvested and cultivated and taken off the plant and dried, that's when the smell
And that
is there.
period of time,
I have to say, I never, in my wildest dreams, since being here since 1994, ever thought that we'd be talking about this in this chamber.
yeah.
Never.
And in the whole, I guess, realm of agricultural, as you're talking about harvesting, growing and all that, how much of a time frame is that harvesting? 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Mr. Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know. I can't answer that with,
Okay.
So if we can get some of those answers for when we're bringing this
Yeah,
report
because
forward,
that'd be
great.
something I'd be interested in, because we all know, we have a company down on Elm Street, and in the ripe of the heat of the summer, I can smell that from, in my house too, but it's only for a short period of time. And yet, I know that that company employs a lot of fellas, and so when people complain to me, I said it's jobs, people, or smell for 2 weeks. So I just wondered if, in the whole realm of it, if you could let me know, I would like to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Butters?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the bottom line is, like, there's still a lot of information to be gathered. You know, what if the scenario was that a company came to town, and as Councillor Kenny said, a lot of jobs, built a state-of-the-art facility in which they could, pretty much guarantee that through filtration systems and all the things that are available now, that there wouldn't be that smell to bother residents. You know, what if that was the scenario? So I don't think that we want to, cut off our nose to spite our face either. I think we have to make sure that we take care of both sides of this issue in a measured, careful way. And obviously, the residents have huge concerns, and they have to be dealt with. And I think in terms of the public process meeting, that when they come forward with those things, all that needs to be addressed, and that's the proper forum for it.
And that's a good point, Councillor. I think that this is the new norm, I'll call it that, with respect to municipalities having to deal with this new industry. It is new industry, there's no question about it, but I think what's important, and I think this is what Dan was alluding to earlier, is that it's done right. And although you're correct that you don't want to put hardship on any new industry coming into town, at the same time, you have to protect the residents, and from that side of the sword, so to speak. But also, as Dan alluded to, if in fact we did have a company that came into town that might have, again, being a layperson, I'll use the word scrubbers or filtration, they can very easily apply to the Committee of Adjustment to then be exempt from that setback, and because of that very reason, because they might have that in place. So the process does lend itself to both sides. I'm just trying to have it done properly so that, again, we don't allow some of this stuff to happen or to be built, and then all of a sudden, a year or two down the road, find out after the fact, and the bylaw's already in place and it's already built, which is unfair to them as well, that we would have to be reacting to it, and because of the negative repercussions of what we didn't proact toward within the setting of the bylaw. Before I go back to you, I have a fellow here that wants to speak.
Thank you. Frank Scott, 394 Pinecrest Road. First, I'd like to thank Council for listening to us and lending your ear. I know that you don't generally allow it done this way, but having come, we do appreciate being heard. The item I was going to bring up was item 5 in the report, which you beat me to, regarding the economic repercussion of the plant, whereby if this operation does go forward, the city could be looking at tax dollars or income which could affect the decision-making of good, bad, or indifferent. And again, we understand that, but just to let you know, we do have that concern.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Demaray, and then back to Councillor Butters. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Aquilina. Dan, I'm just wondering, would the setbacks be challenged often due to the fact that there are a lot of other ag smells out there? There's a lot of ag odor. If you go even by an onion field, there's strong odor. There's manure. There's livestock smells, that sort of thing. This is just one more. So I'm wondering if on that basis we might see a lot of challenges come our way.
Mr. Aquilina.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Demaray. That's a good point as well. I think this smell is a new smell. Everyone smelled manure over the years, right? And back to what Councillor Butters mentioned, they need to actually have the filtration in place to actually stop the odor from escaping from the facility. So there's the checks and balances to be sure that what's built contains the smell within the actual building. We can't allow these, or they're not allowed in the open area. It's got to be contained in a proper building with the proper ventilation and control of the odor escaping.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Butters and then Councillor Bodner.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we get this ball rolling. I don't think that we want to be reacting to things after the fact, that's for sure. And so I think that's extremely important to move this forward expeditiously as possible and get all the meetings scheduled. And it's going to be a lot of work for Dan, but I think that's really our best bet is to do that, to be responsible to all sides.
Great.
Thank you.
Councillor Bodner.
Just to expand maybe on something that Councillor Butters brought up, we're dealing with something we don't even know is going to happen. We're speculating it is. We haven't got any official notice to the city. And, for all we know, the proponent could simply have bought the land. It's a very old greenhouse. They could be simply going, if they do get a license, tear that down and build a new facility, which then could be the facility that is self-contained. It doesn't have to be a greenhouse. It can be a building, lighting all inside and everything. So I think when we try to work this plan, something like that could go in that agricultural area. Am I right? Like, it doesn't have to be a greenhouse. It
Sure.
could be a building, totally contained, scrubbers, lighting all inside. No one, for any intent and purpose, didn't know it was there.
Mr. Aquilina.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Bodner, my understanding is there is controls on what type of building could be built and used. And I am not sure a greenhouse, as we know it would be permissible because it's not secure. It is not secure. And again, the checks and balances that the federal government wants to have in place, it's usually contained in a structure, steel fabricated, metal clad. Everything is inside that building.
But it goes to my question, Dan, with respect to, is that?
Yeah.
Good, thanks, Councillor. It goes to my question with respect to the formula. If in fact that's the case, will there then be a set formula? You mentioned, I believe, D2, that would attach itself to that based on the clad, based on the building, based on the use, that would attach to that zoning a setback.
Correct, Mr. Mayor. There would be one, and if we're looking towards the D6 guidelines, a Class 2 facility has a 70-meter setback. But there are just guidelines. Other areas have actually had a greater setback.
And that's what personally, that's what I'm most interested in, is what should that setback be?
Yes.
Obviously how it's established, but then it's appropriate so that some of the concerns, at least that main concern that the residents have brought forward, at least this evening and I think the last meeting, can be addressed.
Yes.
And then, of course, with that said, that it's appropriate. the last thing we want to do is put a 70-meter setback in, and all of a sudden, regardless of what kind of building they put up, and then find out a year or two later that it wasn't
It's
enough.
not enough, yes. Mr. Mayor, it varies across the province. As I mentioned, next door neighbor to the east has a 70-meter setback. Ottawa, I'm not sure if it's in place yet or that's being proposed, 150 meters. Out west, I've seen up to 500 meters, but that's more or less if you're adjacent to a school or a park or senior housing. Residential to the grow op, anywhere from 70, I've seen up to 150, so.
So when your report comes back to council, it's obviously going to actually have in that report a setback.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and then we can discuss that setback at that time, how appropriate in fact may be, and we can also change it at that time if need be.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, when the notice is out in the paper, it's actually going to specify what that setback is proposed at. Council will then actually have the opportunity, if you don't like that setback, if you want it to be greater or less, that's up to council and for their consideration.
Will we also have, as part of that report, more of a realistic visual or vision with respect to what's going there in terms of the actual building itself and of course how it's going to operate?
We could do that, Mr. Mayor. It would all depend on the scale of the operation, though. I could give you, I don't know, worst case or best case scenario, whatever angle you're looking at. I could get some information at what typically is being built for the ones that are out there right now and licensed.
The challenge here is it's our only kick at the can. It's like the turbines. We don't want to find out after the fact that we should have, and then try to change it. We can't because it's not part of our jurisdiction. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing once the bylaw is established, that's it. It's established, or can we actually go back on the bylaw?
Mr. Mayor, it's just like anything in the zoning bylaw, it can be amended, and it needs to be brought back to council for consideration for approval.
So if we pass that bylaw, and let's say hypothetically we pass it at 70 meters, and then we get notice that someone wants to build something there, and upon getting that notice, we find out this is how it's going to be built, this is the actual structure, this is how we're going to deal with it in terms of how we're going to process it, whether it's going to have ventilation, so on and so forth. We can then go back and have a more stringent setback or less setback.
Mr. Mayor, you would have to go back, it would have to be after the fact, unfortunately. To put something in place and someone's then following the rules, and then someone actually is going ahead and building it, for council then to say, oh, hold on, no, we want that to be 100 meters. Well, the process then would have to be to amend the zoning bylaw, but someone now has an application to do something, and it's been processed. I would caution the difficulty of doing that after the fact. So it's important to get it now.
It's important to get it now, so you'd have to actually come back with a worst case scenario, and council will have to give consideration to the setback based on worst case scenario.
Yes, and it would be the same process as to what we would have to go through to put that in the place in the first place.
Right. Fair enough.
Other application.
I see Nancy's coming back up. You're more than welcome. Come on back up.
It's kind of hard to decide setback when you don't live in the area, but I'm offering anybody on the council city employees who want to come and measure from the greenhouse to my house because it smells like skunk. And when you try and sleep.
How far is that, Nancy?
Well, it's at least 500 meters, I would think. Because they're on Pinecrest.
Are you downwind?
We're down on the fire lane.
Okay, so you are.
Yeah, and the smell is such that it wakes you up in the night. And I know a lot of the people sitting here, they live closer and they can't have their windows open, and it's in the fall and it's beautiful weather. So if someone wants to come and measure, then it gives you an idea of how far the smell goes. It's for a good part of 3 weeks that it's pungent in the back of your throat.
Okay.
It's starting, I drove by today on the way home and I could smell it again.
Okay.
But anybody wants to come and tromp around my place and measure it, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, no problem.
Councilor Bodner?
Just quickly, I wonder whether Dan could alert the people that we already have on the list of when this public meeting will come up, in case they don't see it. I know we have the email addresses and maybe phone numbers of some people that were at previous meetings, just in case someone messes it in the paper. If we know some people to call and they can spread the word. Is that something we can do? Or actually, I would like to see it done.
Mr. Eklund?
Mr. Mayor, I only have one email that came from you. I have a phone number, and I would then urge any member of the public that would like to actually get notice to either send an email to myself or to the city clerk, and then for sure we can do that. If the council's direction is to do so, we can also inform them that way.
Or to myself or to one of the councillors, and we can forward it off to the clerk or to Dan if you want to be notified. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Dan, because we're all picking on you tonight, so you're the expert in the crowd. Just when the speaker said that her house is approximately 500 meters away, any zoning bylaw setback that we're talking about obviously isn't going to be enough. So can you control what they build through site plan agreement as in a construction of a building, and what they need to have as far as purification of exhaust? And second of all, can a setback be penal in nature so that you're actually trying to force the piece of land per se to be non-existent use? So that if you have a setback of 500 meters, the parcel of land which somebody's looking at, that parcel is basically rendered useless because of your setback. You can't meet the setbacks. Therefore, you'd have to come to the Committee of Adjustment for a variance in the setback. Can you penalize land in a setback? Is that, or is that not even a pertinent question? Because what I'm hearing is we want to try to protect people, but can you penalize the property owner in as much as increase the setback so far that you just can't build on that piece of land?
Mr. Aquilina, that goes back to the question I asked earlier about forcing them to go into a certain zone because of the setbacks.
Three questions through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elliott. The site plan control process is not going to actually control the structure being built. Site plan is only going to deal with fencing around the property, any planting strips, lighting, if there's a need for a hard surface on the property. The building of the building would be something through the building code, but they would have to follow other regulations that the federal government has in place that talks about the filtration, all of that. Building code would handle that. To penalize people for setbacks, I wouldn't consider it a penalty. I would say that it's a provision of the zoning bylaw that council has put in place. If council wants to have a 1,000-meter setback from any sensitive land use, you could put that in the bylaw. And then someone's going to then, if they want to actually come forward with actually having that use, they'll be knocking on the Committee of Adjustment door. But it'll be a process that everyone would be informed of within the immediate area, 60 meters of the property.
It's very difficult to talk about the unknown, unfortunately. One of the things that we might want to do in the meantime too, Dan, while you're drafting that report, is get some of that information, obviously, especially with respect to the structure itself. And I think council should be prepared to actually, I won't use the word protest, I think that's a bit strong of a word, but I'll say pass on our concerns with respect to the importance and impress upon the importance of the facility itself and the need to contain the odor within the facility. I'm sure they're considering that. I don't think they're going to dismiss that or ignore that, but I think, you know, it's best if we actually make it known that we are concerned about what we're hearing, especially as it relates to the construction and or maintenance of the facility with respect to the processing of this product, especially as it relates to the actual odor of the product. For all we know, they can come back and say, you know, we've heard that loud and clear. The expectations with respect to the construction of a facility like this is going to demand a clad building, filtration, and so on and so forth, and we would expect that no odor would then be released from the building. They may say that, but I think at the very least we should at least at the very least bring it to their attention with respect to it being a concern. So while they're drafting their regulations, they can hopefully include that. If they already haven't, they can include that within their expected construction templates. Okay. Members of council, are there any further questions or comments? Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. Dan had mentioned that we should break this up into two portions, agricultural first, and then into the industrial zoning. Through you to Dan. Dan, can we do it concurrently, or do you want to do one after the other?
Mr. Aquilina.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Steele, I would recommend that council just gives direction. I would like to actually propose two amendment processes. One dealing right now on the agricultural.
That's right.
The official plan amendment, because it's a citywide official plan, it's got to get approved by the region of Niagara. It's a longer process. I wouldn't want to tie the two together because it could be months before we get a decision back from the regional government. So council's direction, deal right now with the agricultural zone provisions, and then when that process is done, then I can start.
The other one.
Yes.
And we have,
I'll put that
we have the mover and seconder already. Yeah. The mover and seconder okay with that? That's fine. So if you can add that into the overall motion, Madam Clerk, that's fine. Are there any further questions or comments from members of council? Are there any further questions or comments from members of the public? You will have another kick at the can when the report comes back. Please let us know if you want to be informed. Again, you can inform Dan, the clerk, myself, or members of council to be on that list, and that way we can get you guys informed that the report's coming to council, and you can be ready for your attendance at that meeting.
I'll just keep it short, but I do appreciate all your comments so far. They're very enlightening, and it's good discussion. Dan, I appreciate all the hard work that you put into this so far, so hopefully it will go somewhere. We're sort of dwelling on the kind of problem of the smell. I mean, there's all sorts of problems located with this location here. You have wetlands that are, you're saying 500 meters, I think? I mean, you have wetlands that are probably 100 meters from this location. You have a Boy Scout camp half a kilometer away, residents 50 feet away, 100 feet. So, I mean, these are the concerns. It's more than just the smell. And smell is, Councilman Kenny, I think you said, a couple weeks now. It's about three months for the harvest. According to I think it went from August to sometime in October, sometime. And now the lighting, if you were to go by any time of the day, especially at night, it may make Christmas time seem pretty low because it lights up a kilometer away. So I myself, there's several houses that back into this facility, and I'm sure they're all lit up throughout the whole evening. Fans galore, the noise. So, yeah, we're not just dealing with smell, we're dealing with noise levels, wetlands, Boy Scout camps, that's the public, residential. So there's all sorts of issues involved with this location. And again, I appreciate all the comments today and all the councilman members here, and especially Dan and the city.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Members of council, with no further questions or comments, I'll ask for your pleasure on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. And to all you folks, thank you for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion this evening? No notices of motion. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this part of tonight's agenda. Councillor Butters, Councillor Desmarais, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. We'll now move on to our council agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any addendum items?
Thank you, none this evening.
Thank you, Ashley. Members of council, I'll entertain a motion to confirm the agenda, please. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Doucette, are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Disclosures of interest, Councillor Bodner.
Number 18, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further disclosures, members? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I get a direct pecuniary interest in camera item B, as I am an applicant for a position on that board.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Any further disclosures? With none, move on to the adoption of the minutes. I do have one set of minutes here, the minutes of the second meeting regular of council, dated January 27th, 2014. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Butters, Councillor Bodner, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. Items requiring separate discussion. If somebody can lift those two items, please. Councillor Steele. We have item 18.
The other one's in camera.
Yeah, the other one's in camera, so we'll lift that one as well. And note that, Madam Clerk. Okay. Councillor Steele. Actually, let's adopt the remainder of the items first. Mover and seconder, please, for the remainder of the items. Councillor Desmarais, Councillor Steele. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Worship. I'll move item 18, Shirks and Shores, request for permission to hold weekly fireworks display events for 2014.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Seconder to that, please. Councillor Desmarais, questions or comments to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. I do have two proclamations, members, that I'll be looking for a mover and seconder on. The first being Doctors with a Heart Day. That whereas Wednesday, February 12, 2014 is recognized as Doctors with a Heart Day, and whereas following this long established annual tradition, Dr. David Solanke and Associates of Chiropractic Associates of Port Colborne will examine and treat all members of the local community at no charge on Wednesday, February 12, 2014. And whereas Dr. Solanke and his staff will waive all treatment fees this day, and in lieu of charging any patient fees, will invite members of the community to bring in donations for the Port Colborne Humane Society. The Humane Society provides shelter and emergency services to animals in crisis that have been victims of abuse and neglect here within our community and neighboring communities. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Vance M. Badaway, proclaim Wednesday, February 12, 2014, as Doctors with a Heart Day here in the city of Port Colborne. Mover and seconder, please. I knew that hand was going up. Councillor Butters and Councillor Desmarais, are there any questions or comments to that proclamation? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to World Autism Awareness Day. That whereas World Autism Awareness Day will be recognized for the second year in Canada on April 2nd, 2014. And whereas as a means of increasing public awareness about autism, spectrum disorder, ASD, and the day-to-day issues faced by people with autism and their families, Autism Ontario is inviting municipalities across the province of Ontario to raise awareness of ASD by participating in the 2014 Raise the Flag campaign. And whereas ASD affects more than 100,000 Ontarians and is recognized as the most common neurological disorder affecting 1 in every 94 children, as well as their friends, their family, and overall community. And whereas ASD is a spectrum disorder, which means it not only manifests itself differently in every individual in whom it appears, but its characteristics will change over the life of each individual as well. And whereas Autism Ontario is the leading source of information on autism and is one of the largest collective voices representing the autism community throughout the province of Ontario. And whereas Autism Ontario is dedicated to increasing public awareness about autism and the issues faced by the individuals with autism, their families, and once again, the professionals with whom they interact. The association and its chapters share the common goals of providing information and education, supporting research and advocacy. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Vance M. Badaway, proclaim April 2nd, 2014 as World Autism Day here in the city of Port Colborne. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Doucette. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Steele. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to minutes of boards, commissions, and committees. I have 4 sets of minutes here, and if you don't mind, I'll do them in block. That's fine. The minutes of the Port Colborne Historical and Marine Museum meeting of November 19th, 2013. The minutes of the Seniors Advisory Council meeting of December 19th, 2013. The minutes of the Port Colborne Transit Advisory Committee meeting of November 27th, 2013. And the minutes of the Port Colborne Gateway Business Improvement Area Board of Management meeting dated September 17th, 2013. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Steele, Councillor Bodner, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Are there any notices of motion? With none, Madam Clerk, the introduction of the bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that the following bylaws be read 3 times and finally passed. Bylaw 60430914 being a bylaw to provide for an appointment to the Heritage Port Colborne Committee. Bylaw 6044-1014, being a bylaw to enter into a standard contract agreement with Ontario One Call for membership services. Bylaw 6045-1114, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 89-2000, being a bylaw regulating traffic and parking on city roads for Field and Avenue. And finally, bylaw 6046-1214, being a bylaw to change the name of the Port Colborne Seniors Advisory Council and amend bylaw 5328-8309.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Doucette, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. The confirmatory bylaw, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that the following bylaw be read 3 times and finally passed. Bylaw 6047-1314, being a bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Port Colborne at its meeting of February 10, 2014.
Thank you. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Bodner, Councillor Elliott, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Before I ask for a motion to go into closed session, once again, we will be having a budget meeting tomorrow here in the chamber. That's Tuesday, February 11th, here in the chamber, beginning at 7:30 p.m. And once again, I'm hoping to put the rest of the 2014 budget. Staff has done a considerable amount of work in the last few weeks to bring it down. I know it's come down, and hopefully that makes council a bit more comfortable with the increase. And as well, I'm sure council will have something to say with the budget overall with respect to your wishes as well. Following that, on February 24th is our next Committee of the Whole and Council meeting, beginning at 6:30 p.m., once again here in the chamber. So with that, I will entertain a motion for council to go into closed session to deal with the minutes of the closed session portion of the January 27th, 2014 regular council meeting. B, Confidential Community and Corporate Services Clerks Division Report number 2014-4. The subject, recommendation for appointment to the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority pursuant to Municipal Act 2001, subsection 2392B. Personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. C, Confidential Chief Administrative Officer Special Projects and Corporate Strategic Initiatives Report number 2014-2, that's a mouthful, concerning matters impacting the Port Colborne Energy Park pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001, subsection 2392C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. And D, finally, Confidential Chief Administrative Officer Special Projects and Corporate Strategic Initiatives Report number 2014-3, concerning, once again, a potential acquisition of land by the municipality pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001, subsection 92C, a proposed or pending acquisition of land by the municipality or local board. That was long. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Bodner, Councillor Desmarais, are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Have a wonderful week, and go Canada.